This is the Relationship Podcast, the show that discusses all relationship matters from an Asian American perspective, with your hosts, Entree, John, and Ryan. Be sure to check out our previous episodes on Podbean, iTunes, and Google Play. And now, enjoy the fresh hot rice.
TheRelationship Podcast.
Hey, what's up, everybody? This is the Relationship Podcast. My name is Ryan.
Yo, what's up? This is John, old, dumb, and full of cum.
What in the... This is Dre.
Oh, man. Wow, John. What a way to set things off,
You know, very rigid.
All right.
Speaking of rigidity, or however you want to put that, John,
Sure.
Today's relationship, besides John's old relationship of himself, we're actually talking about the 5 stages of a relationship. And being that we are a relationship podcast, we never really dive into what makes a relationship what it is. So today's topic is surrounded and encompassed by none other than George Levinger. So, John, what is it about George Levinger that our audience should know about?
George Levinger, he's pretty much the pioneer researcher on interpersonal attraction and close relationships. He's had dozens of articles, but some of the most notable that he co-authored is the first one's called Close Relationships, Perspectives on the Meaning of Intimacy. The second one is Divorce and Separation, Context, Causes, and Consequences. And the third one is Close Relationships. He was a professor of psychology at University of Massachusetts, Amherst, from 1965 to 1992. Unfortunately, he passed away this July 3rd. Rest in peace.
Shoutouts to Mr. Levinger for all your work. You're the real MVP, and this episode's dedicated to you. So we are going to go over the 5 stages of any relationship according to Mr. Levinger, starting with the first one. It's the acquaintance stage, which is defined by the relationship starts with mutual attraction. What do you guys think of that definition? You guys agree or disagree with it so far?
It's pretty self-explanatory, so yes, I do agree.
How about you, Andre?
I don't really have a problem with it. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. Yeah.
Okay.
It's pretty basic.
Basic. Oh boy, we will definitely unfold this basicness in future episodes. Anyway, going beyond basic, let's go over to the second stage. It is called the build-up. And what this is, it's defined as couples who engage in self-disclosure and become increasingly interdependent. Let's start off with you, John. What do you think of this definition?
I agree. There definitely is a build-up after acquaintance. I don't know. There isn't that much to say about the build-up.
What about you, Andre?
Yeah, I mean, the whole self-disclosure part, I think, is like the key. And the interdependence. I mean, yeah, that's a pretty good working definition. Yeah, because that's definitely the next logical step after the mutual attraction. You start confiding in one another. You start hanging out, and your lives start to become more intertwined. So there's that interdependence on each other. So yeah, I mean, it's pretty on point in my eyes.
Okay. Very interesting. Very interesting. Other than the build-up and the anticlimax that John proposed earlier in this episode of ours. But anyway, what?
What? But Andre did mention intertwined, and that goes well with the build-up.
So you were intertwined with your hands, I'm guessing, right, John? You're kind of tied up.
You know, legs.
Self-love.
Self-love. Lefty and righty.
All right. Anyway, as relevant as this may sound, awkwardly speaking, the next stage is continuation. And continuation is defined as the couple's lives have become enmeshed and the relationship is consolidated. What do you guys think about this particular stage?
I don't have a problem with this stage. I think this is a stage where couples kind of they're more than comfortable, if it's a good way to put it. The other word I would probably put it as is you're kind of on autopilot because you're both comfortable in each other's skin, literally and figuratively.
What about you, Andre? Is this comfort of skin something that you could relate to with John's definition or interpretation, rather?
I'm so glad you said with the definition, because if you said I was comfortable with that with John, nah, we ain't there yet. Not there yet. Not quite.
You don't love John that much, right?
It's baby smooth. It's baby smooth.
Oh man. But as far as the definition goes, and John's interpretation, actually, like I kind of like the concept of autopilot. It I don't know if I would sum it up in just that, but I feel like that's a pretty good description of what it feels like, for better or worse. You just tend to feel comfortable, and yeah, you don't necessarily, we'll put it this way, you don't necessarily have to course correct or anything at this stage. You're basically, you know each other well enough to know what it is you need to be doing to keep the relationship going. And I think for most people, they're self-aware of what it would take to end it as well. So the buttons have already been pressed, and yeah, you're kind of coasting, I guess you could say, with that knowledge.
Two things. What is these buttons you are referring to that have been pressed? And number two, since it's 2017, I think the more proper term to autopilot should be amended with Tesla'd, because Tesla allows you to auto cruise around the freeways and, you know, be self-sufficient in that manner.
Would Elon Musk approve of this?
I'm sure he would, as long as there are buttons to be pressed, right?
He has like 5 kids, doesn't he? He knows all about pressing buttons.
So he knows how to double click that mouse in, right?
Yeah, I guess so. You actually, for a quick aside, I don't know if you guys knew this, but like Elon Musk, I don't know if this is true or not, but it seems like he keeps making cars for every new kid that he has, because his first one was a Roadster, the second one was the Model S, then the P85,
Sure.
and then he made the Model X, which has more seating. So they just keep getting bigger and bigger.
What does that mean? He has more seats.
They just keep adding seats as he has more kids.
Oh boy.
Huh.
But as far as I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Continue.
Oh, as far as the pushing buttons, or what buttons I'm referring to, yeah, it's pushing buttons. So like, you know how, like grinding gears, pushing buttons, like what the other person's pet peeves are,
Right.
and what annoys them and stuff like that. The deal breakers, if you will, if you want to talk about stuff that we've talked about already. Yeah, you're more self-aware, or you're more aware in general of these things about your partner, and so you know to either stay away from them, or you know their likes, and you know what it is you need to do to make them happy. And then on the second point, Tesla autopilot, I don't know if you guys have ever driven a Tesla. That is it's a trip, dude. I had to drive one back from Vegas, and that autopilot is
I'm telling you, right?
It works. It's kind of jerky, but it works.
Told you.
Oh, really?
Tesla 2017 autopilot,
Absolutely.
man.
Wow.
See?
I would never own one because I don't know. I'm not. I'm still what they call. Well, I'm still what they call in the U.S. a gearhead.
Sure.
Or in the U.K. they call them petrol heads. I don't know. I'm more into gas cars. It's just the feel of the car is still kind of. It's not quite there yet.
The analog hasn't left the building, as
Old school,
some would
man.
put
Old
it.
school.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
But those cars are fast. But yeah, we'll just
We'll save it for another podcast, Andre. I think we definitely have a spin-off series brewing, right?
Oh yeah, if you guys want to talk about, I used to work in the automotive industry, so
oh yeah,
we can talk about it for days.
We will definitely get into that, and I'm definitely into cars as well. I will say, however, as a perfect detour into before our next stage, I think with continuation, one of the things that should be considered should be this idea of what I would like to call sort of a checkpoint or like a crossroads or a waypoint, whatever you'd like to define it as. Because at some point when your relationship becomes Tesla'd or Autopilot or however you think of it as, there's a certain junction when you reach it with your partner, whether they're just your girlfriend or boyfriend or they're your husband, wife, fiance. And it's sort of like a checklist of, is everything still lining up or is everything still good? What are you guys' thoughts on that amendment in terms of after being on autopilot for a while?
That's actually a good point. When you're in the continuation stage, I imagine you're there because kind of like, kind of those checklists, like personal goals align, professional goals align, life plans kind of align, and that's kind of where you're at in the continuation stage. And that's when two people are actually truly comfortable with each other.
Yeah. And
from that point on, autopilot turns on.
Okay. How about you, Andre? What are your thoughts on that suggested amendment I made about checkpoint or waypoint or crossroads after continuation?
I don't know if I would want to group it with this stage. I feel like it comes a little bit after because I feel like
it's not grouped. It's not grouped. It's
it's not. Yeah.
No.
If you meant it to like the end of it, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, this is where that sort of stuff would happen. Yeah, I agree with that.
Right.
Yeah. I think, and just to establish this with everybody in our audience listening in, I think there's definitely going to be things that are a little bit more applicable in modern times, obviously, but we'll definitely continue that discussion when we go through the rest of the stages. So glad to hear that you guys are on board with that amendment, which would lead to our next and more unfortunate stage that a lot of people reach is deterioration. And that's defined as the relationship may become imbalanced due to incongruent investment from both parties. High risk does not always equal high reward. Let's start off with you, John. What are your thoughts on that definition?
Okay, so we're in the deterioration stage because I believe either one of the checkboxes becomes misaligned or your goals either changes for one or the other. And I think that's where that happens, and where we jump into this deterioration stage.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I have.
All right. Okay. I thought you were gonna say something more profound, and I was waiting for it. So, all right.
No.
How about you, Andre?
Nothing profound.
Sorry, I wasn't profound enough. My bad.
You held that pause, and Andre and I were just waiting. Like, what's next?
Kept you on your toes.
You have pretty high expectations for someone who introduced himself with "come."
I know. Benefit of the doubt.
But that came at the end, all right?
Or was it the beginning?
I didn't start off with "come." I ended with "come."
As with most things.
You're welcome. All right. Moving on.
Wipe your mouth, please.
Oh my God.
Oh right. God, John. All right. Andre. What do you think, man?
Deterioration. So yeah, which with the way that Levinger defines it and the way that John defined it, it's that's I accept that as a definition. The only thing that I would add, I would say, is I forgot what I was gonna say.
Brain fart. Just straight up brain fart.
Be profound.
Oh hell no! Now the pressure's on.
Not John's profoundness. No.
I'm just gonna agree with that. Deterioration. It works fine for me. I don't know. I had something profound to say, and then we got sidetracked with John's cum, and
What?
it'll probably come back to me later.
That cum is deteriorating. Speaking of which, let's get into the last stage, which is termination. And the definition of that is after deterioration reaches its peak, you reach the point of no return, or PNR as some people might put it, and the relationship ends. So let's start off with you, Mr. Cum Deterioration John. How do you feel about that last stage?
How do I feel about the last stage?
Yeah.
For modern times, it's referred to as ghosting.
Ghosting? Really? All right. I'll give you. I'll let you speak on that. Well, why do you think it's ghosting?
Because that's when it ends. The other person disappears.
But I feel like
Termination.
But I feel like ghosting is it's more of a situational context. But I don't know. What do you think about that, Andre? That whole ghosting aspect. Do you think this applies here, or do you feel like that's taken completely out of context? What are your thoughts on this?
I barely learned about ghosting like 3 episodes ago, so I don't really have too much to say about it. Based on what I learned, I don't.
And in application to this final stage, what do you think about that?
I feel like termination, I guess, I mean, in a broad sense, you could apply ghosting, but I think the way that Levinger defines it or means for it to be applied is a little bit different.
Yep.
Because I feel like ghosting is more for less serious relationships.
I agree.
Because I don't think someone you ghost, you would even get to continuation.
Yep.
That is true.
Yeah. So I don't know how much I would apply that. But as far as the definition, I actually remembered what I was going to say about deterioration.
Okay.
And it kind of applies to termination as well.
Sure. Yeah.
So how we were saying that continuation is the autopilot. And I was saying that you'd have to press buttons or grind gears and things like that. Yeah, deterioration is part of that, actually, whether subconsciously or consciously, one of the partners is pressing those buttons, or the way I'm interpreting this. So it doesn't necessarily mean that someone's fallen out of love or somebody's putting in more work than somebody else, or the attraction's just not there anymore. It could also mean that whether they realize it or not, one person is whether passively or actively kind of falling out of the expectations of the relationship, let's say, and termination would be the culmination of that. And you gotta part ways.
Yeah, I think I want to highlight a very interesting point there about that whole idea of pushing buttons. It's interesting, and maybe this is something we could extrapolate in a separate episode, but it's the way in which people press certain buttons and it's just not working anymore, right? It's these combinations used to work, right? You would go out to a movie or go to your favorite restaurant spot or say certain things to make them laugh or make them happy. But then for whatever the reason, that honeymoon or that romance sort of begins to dissipate a little bit, right? Begins to wither. And because of that, I think this is definitely going to warrant a separate topic in the future, or a separate episode, but it's this idea that now it begins, it's sort of the enlightenment for yourself or your partner or both of you that, maybe the magic is beginning to fade, and now, the real work at maintaining the relationship would begin. So I guess as a follow-up to that, Andre, do you feel like sort of that enlightenment or that, that transitory phase of, the magic's starting to fade, or the honeymoon phase is starting to fade, do you feel that would sort of be like a little bit of a substage between sort of the checklist and the deterioration? Like there would be a secondary stage after the checklist stage? What do you think about that? since you're the one who brought it up.
Yeah, now that I'm kind of looking, if I take a step back and take what you said into consideration, I don't know if I would consider it a substage.
Yeah?
I think the way that I would frame it actually is maybe something more cyclical. Something like you go into continuation, you may fall into deterioration, but then you kind of come back into continuation.
Sure.
Because thinking back on my own life and my own relationships, including the one I'm in right now, yeah, it's not always cut and dry what stage you're at. I mean, I guess if you really wanted to, you could put a sub-stage in there and you're kind of like perpetually stuck in there.
Yeah.
But I think for most people who are in long-lasting relationships or long-term relationships, they find that they kind of bounce back and forth because it's just the high and low points of your relationship. I mean, I think everyone would agree that they would love to be in a relationship that's always in that continuation stage. Everything's hunky-dory. I don't know why I said that, but
showing your age, man. That abacus style.
I didn't even use that when I was younger. I don't know where that came from.
Hunky-dory.
Hunky-dory. But yeah, I don't know. I'm sure everyone would want to stay on autopilot and then never falter and enter into deterioration. But I mean, it's an inevitability. I feel it's an inevitability. I think it's even more dangerous if you expect to only be in continuation. I think you have to expect to enter deterioration at some point, and that's how you grow as a couple. If the more you bounce, well, I mean, it shouldn't be a regular thing, but the more times you bounce back from deterioration, the stronger theoretically you would be as a couple.
Theoretically speaking, of course. Yeah. No, I could agree to that. Well, what are your thoughts on that, John? It seems like you have some thoughts on that.
Occasionally I have some thoughts, but yes, I do agree with that. Because I mean, I guess in life you don't really get anywhere being comfortable. So when couples can kind of manage to get through problems, they do definitely, I think, grow. And that's where, people tend to develop this trust with each other much more. Now, I'm sure most of us have worked in teams before, and then it's such an high, right? When there's a problem and then everyone can solve the problem.
Sure.
So I think that's very much how it works with couples as well. You get this problem, you both are able to solve it together. And then there's such this, I don't know, what's a good word for it? Inspiration. And also that trust you have for each other and to be able to jump back into the continuation stage and then move on.
Well, I think this is definitely something worth exploring in another episode, not to detract our current one, of course. But I mean, I guess this is exactly why the coined phrase honeymoon phase kind of came into light, right? It's this idea of this ideal sort of transitory, like you just got married or you met the love of your life and everything is like peachy, aka hunky-dory, aka, you're on cloud 9 and nothing could stop either one of you from enjoying the relationship and what it has to offer. So I definitely think and believe that this is something we should definitely extrapolate upon. But to move forward with our current episode and topic, I think the first thing that I want to ask is, as a follow-up to all these stages, do you guys agree with the order and the definition of these terms? So let's start off with you, John. What do you think? I know you've shared your thoughts on each one, but what about the order? Do you think the order makes sense?
Yeah, I think the order makes sense. It's definitely a macro level of putting stages in a relationship. And, I don't have a problem with the order or the definitions that he put together.
Okay. Does this include, what about the suggested amended, like sort of modern substages that I added, such as the checkpoint or that, that first self-realization of, oh shit, the honeymoon phase is over. Do you think that still is also applicable? And of course, Andre's like idea of cyclical, manners jumping between continuation and deterioration. Do you think that applies?
I don't necessarily think there needs to be another stage. I guess it's somewhat implied once you get into the deterioration stage.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, so I don't really think it needs its own stage.
Okay. What about you, Andre? What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with John. I mean, this list is meant to be macro level. I mean, if you really wanted to get really down on it, you could put substages in between all of the 5 stages and turn it into 10 if you really wanted to.
Yeah.
And
right.
I don't think it would really add anything to the overall concept. As far as the order goes, I mean, it really depends on Levinger's intent with this list, and I doubt it, but it looks linear.
Yeah.
I doubt he meant it to look that way, or maybe, I'm not sure, maybe in like a super macro level it's meant to be linear, because I mean, yeah, I guess, but yeah, the whole continuation deterioration thing is, I view it to be cyclical. I view it to be something that you can bounce back and forth between. Because if deterioration was the end, like the beginning of the end,
sure,
then there shouldn't be a termination stage. You see what I mean?
Yeah. And, this is something that I kind of want to highlight with sort of that second point in the termination definition, the point of no return. And again, I think this is something that we'll definitely talk about in future episodes. But I feel like the point of no return is what allows you to enable this idea of the termination stage, right? It's, for some people, maybe it's cheating. For some people, maybe it's failure to be a good husband or wife. A slew of reasons, right? And I think if the point of no return is exactly what catalyzes this termination stage, and there are instances that people have a premature sort of termination or sort of deterioration or ghosting or whatever you would like to call it, and it isn't necessarily the relationship's terminated, it just kind of awkwardly ended, right? But again, I do agree with you that it can be cyclical between continuation and deterioration. And yeah, that's definitely something we should revisit when we expand upon that in a future episode. So the second follow-up question to all these stages are there any stages other than what we mentioned in between the discussion that we haven't already listed? Let's start off with you, John.
Is there any stages?
Or sub-stages or anything?
No, I think he encapsulated it pretty well. I don't think there is anything. I mean, this is a quite a broadly how he put it. And it's meant to be general. But I mean, you can add, like, I don't know.
What about your ghosting stage, John?
my ghosting stage? Yeah, I was gonna
like
say
after build up, right?
Yeah, I mean, after termination, you could put like fuck this chick, I'm gonna go with my side chick stage.
Wow, you went there.
So termination into build up.
Yeah,
yeah.
Just
side build up. Side build up.
Essentially.
The stages never end. You just
yeah, exactly. The stages never end, really.
I was talking about cyclical, and you took it to the next level.
Yeah.
Man. The whole thing is cyclical to you.
What? In essence, it is. I mean, this stuff happens. It's just, you could have these stages in, what's a good word for it? In continuity. No, I don't know the correct word.
As long as you don't say simultaneously.
Yeah, I was gonna. That's what I was gonna say. Actually, yeah, that's what I meant. There's some people have these simultaneously.
That assumes that you have multiple partners.
Exactly.
Right.
Oh, all right.
Oh man,
that's what you meant. All right, well, we're in agreement there. I don't have any argument with that.
I'm not saying I do, but there are some people who do.
All right, yeah, that's true. I'll give you that.
But I think that goes beyond, this whole idea of a relationship. Now we're getting into more like relationship dynamics, like polyamorous relationships, right? Like swingers or, shared partners and the whole the whole nine, and I feel like that's something we'll definitely expand upon. But I see where you're coming from, for sure.
It's a different podcast. Different episodes.
So, outside of the scope
Same
of this
podcast,
episode.
different episode. What about you, Andre? Any stages you feel are missing other than what we already mentioned and amended?
No. I mean, I as far as anything that's missing, I don't see anything missing, because as long as we're looking at this under the spectacles of macro level thinking, I do stand by my statement that continuation. There's got to be somewhere to I guess accentuate that idea, because I feel like that this doesn't come across. A lot of people will look at this list and be like, "Oh yeah, this is linear." Once I get to deterioration, it's over. And I think part of that is probably due to a common widespread belief in soulmates.
Oh, man.
Destiny kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Because I actually read somewhere, actually, let me see if I can pull it up. It's by Andrew G. Marshall.
Okay.
He's actually like a super well-known, if not the best well-known marital therapist in the UK.
Okay.
And he did a study of, I believe it's 200 people. I think 200 was his sample size.
Sure.
Okay.
And he found that a pretty significant percentage of people who believed in soulmates and destiny, he found that they were more likely to not be able to maintain long-term relationships. And I think the conclusion he came to was these people had either too high of an expectation of what a relationship should be, or I would argue that it has something to do with the interpretation of these 5 stages. Because
interesting.
If you believe that everything is supposed to be, and I'm going to use it again, hunky-dory in your relationship.
Word of the night, right? Hunky-dory.
And something goes awry, obviously the first thing you're going to think is, or if you believe in that stuff, obviously the first thing you're going to think is, you know what? It's not in the stars or whatever. But the reality of it is, relationships require work.
Yeah.
I mean,
God damn it.
Just happen. I know, right?
No Tesla for you, John.
Oh.
Autopilot's great, but I mean, even with the Tesla, it only works on the highway.
Yeah.
If you have to get off the road and have to start dealing with some stop signs and stoplights, you're still asleep at the wheel, you're gonna run into something.
Yeah,
for sure.
You're SOL.
Right.
Yeah. So it's the same with relationships. I mean, it's nice when something's in autopilot. It really is, and I feel like most people would want to be in that stage forever, but it's not reality. It's not realistic, and you have to be prepared for any difficulties that might come your way, whether they're stuff that's out of your control or maybe even some stuff that's self-inflicted. You still have to be ready for it.
Yeah.
And I think that study that Marshall did was pretty telling in how a misinterpretation of something like this can actually make it harder for you to be in a long-term relationship.
Very wise words, Andre. And, I think it's sort of interesting hearing that from the study and from one of the premier researchers in this field, because you'd think with this idea of soulmates, or the one, that people would be more invested, if not over the top invested, when they met their so-called other half, right? And this is depicting the complete opposite. So I guess with that being said, any final thoughts from you guys based off of what we covered with George Levinger? Starting off with you, John.
Well, first of all, I want to agree about your assessment about soulmates. I think it's not logical and it's pretty much irrational, because the whole idea of thinking it'll work out just because it'll work out, and it is kind of counterintuitive to think that, I guess, because you think you can continue doing what you're doing and it'll work out at the end, or it won't work out. And it's probably be even more devastating if it doesn't, right? Because then your whole idea of soulmates just disappears. And that doesn't work in real life. IRL.
IRL. Okay. What about you, Andre? Any final thoughts on your end?
I think I kind of summed it up pretty well with the whole aside about soulmates. I think I wanted it there, just as a cautionary tale to anybody listening out there who may believe in that concept. I don't personally believe in soulmates or destiny or anything like that, but I mean, that's not preventing me from getting married. That's, if anything, I'm more emboldened by a realistic view of love and relationships. But at the same time, yeah, if you believe in that, that's fine. But I would just, like I said, I would be wary on your expectations of the relationships you get in, because we're talking about real life and we're talking about real people here, and you can't expect things to be perfect. And not saying you should lower your standards, but sometimes a little realism is enough to balance out the things in your life. If you become a little too optimistic, I guess you could say.
Awesome. For myself, and just to kind of wrap up this entire episode, I think the other takeaway is, it's one thing to sort of romanticize and picture this ideal relationship and the cycles and the drama and the bursts of emotions and sort of physical states that you'll probably experience. But at the end of the day, as everyone already echoed, a relationship takes work, and it takes both parties, not just from your partner, but also for you yourself. And if both of you, regardless of what stage you're at in the relationship, is not willing to communicate, is not willing to meet in the middle, is not willing to understand sort of the evolving needs and desires of each other, then it's definitely something to keep in mind as you learn and progress through life and potentially progress into a new relationship. So to end it on that note, let's definitely remind you guys that we are on social media, not in real life, sort of, indirectly speaking. We are at Twitter, at the R Podcast. We are also on Instagram, at the Relationship Podcast, using 1P. And we could also be reached via Gmail, whether you have feedback, questions, humor, or whatever it is that you want to share with us. The Relationship Podcast with 1P at gmail.com. We are definitely also accessible via iTunes, Google Play, as well as any other place you listen to your podcasts. My name is Ryan.
This is John.
This is Dre.
And we're signing off. Peace. Have a great week.
Deuce.
Late.
This is our non-salty disclaimer. We here at the Relationship Podcast do not discriminate based on race, sexual orientation, income levels, political affiliation, religion, and/or creeds. These opinions are solely based on our own unique experiences, and they are not the exception. We are always open to everyone's personal life experiences that are being shared, and at the end of the day, we can always agree to disagree. So please enjoy our podcast.
No problem. Just rush hour.